Hello everyone, I am Big Rat 310 with another edition of the Shooting with the Shooters interview series. My guest today is
Amcn1, but you can all just call me Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron. So Aaron, let's get the ball rolling. Let's start off with the first question I ask every guest. You've spoken about it before, but let's get right into it. What got you into pro wrestling?
I don't actually remember if I've spoken about this on camera before, but let's go ahead and tell the story. I'd say I got into it, I want to say late 99, early 2000. I was at a friend's house, and we went up to the bedroom of her two older brothers to see what they were up to, and they were watching a WWF home video of Bad Blood 1997. They were about halfway through the show, and we started watching it with them. And I don't remember much from that show. I remember there being an 8-man tag. I remember there being a match with Bret Hart and Davey Boy Smith. And then I remember the main event and the first ever Hell in a Cell. I was really captivated by that match, and I think it was important for me as a young kid to watch a match like that to get into pro wrestling, because I'm really not a sports fan. You know, the most popular sports here in this country are hurling, Gaelic football, and soccer, and I'm not really a big fan of any of them. So for me to get into pro wrestling, it wasn't going to be like a technical epic between, you know, HBK and Bret Hart. It was going to be something, a big spectacle like the first Hell in a Cell, you know, that was going to get me into wrestling. And combine that with, you know, how one-sided that match is. You know, Taker pretty much dominates the whole thing. So to me, as a young kid, I would just be saying near the end of that match, my God, Taker must be the best wrestler in the world. And then Kane came in and ended the match on his terms, and I was just left thinking, okay, now Kane is the best wrestler. And the funny thing is, after I said that, those two brothers turned to me and said, well, we know someone who's better than Kane. And they showed me Stone Cold. And, you know, Kane had came in and he looked scary as hell. And then they showed me Stone Cold, who looked absolutely ordinary by comparison. So I didn't have a clue why they were trying to tell me that Austin was better than Kane. That just seemed like a stupid idea to me. Yeah, but that was my first look at pro wrestling, and I started watching more of the tapes that they had. I could only watch wrestling at that time through tapes, because I didn't have the TV package that had Raw and SmackDown at that time. So it was their tapes, and the only thing I had was, on the free TV package, there was a channel that at that time had maybe 4 WWF pay-per-views a year. And the first one I watched on that channel was Fully Loaded 2000, which had what I remember to be a classic Last Man Standing match between Jericho and Triple H. So watched that, and for about 2 years, that's how I followed wrestling. I would watch the pay-per-views that I could on that channel, and I would get my uncle, who did have the bigger TV package, to send me tapes of the other pay-per-views. So from about 2000 until early 2002, that's how I followed wrestling. And then it was shortly after WrestleMania 18, I'd say, when we finally, in this house, got the big Sky TV package, and I could watch Raw and SmackDown for the first time, and that was quite exciting, you know.
Yeah.
It was funny, at that time we didn't get Raw live. It aired over here on Friday nights, and what I used to do is I would just tape the Raw on that Friday night and watch it on Saturday morning, and then be in time to watch SmackDown as well, because we got SmackDown on Saturday mornings at that time. So I would watch the pretty much entire week's worth of WWF programming, WWE programming in one sitting, and I would do it because that's how exciting I found it then. So, and then about mid-2003, we started getting Raw live, and the whole thing changed. Then now it was a case of me getting up early on Tuesday mornings to watch as much of it as I could before I had to go to school. And then the first thing I would do when I got home was finish the show. So, but it was, no matter what, I was always going to watch it, because it was very, very exciting stuff. So that was it.
It's a very interesting start, especially the part of trying to watch it before school, because for me, I remember my parents they would just tell me I can only watch 30 minutes of Raw, then I had to go to bed. And
well, live Raw for us would be 2 a.m. So
okay.
I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, okay.
Live.
There you go. Now for that aspect, we're gonna get back to the WWE and that start, but we also have to go to the second most important start off question. How did you get on the internet for pro wrestling?
The internet for pro wrestling, well, if you're just talking about YouTube, I don't think it's a terribly interesting story. It's probably the story that you've heard several times already, but I'll just give a bit of background to make it a bit more personal. Basically, in 2007, I pretty much stopped watching WWE entirely. That I didn't order WrestleMania that year. That was actually the second year in a row that I didn't order it. And the fact that that was the second year in a row, I just thought to myself, wow, I just don't enjoy this as much as I used to. But since all I had ever known was a good wrestling product, to me, I actually thought it was me that was just growing out of it. I just didn't realize that it was just not as good as it was. But yeah, in 2007, I just gradually just stopped watching, and that was it for a while. And then in 2009, that summer of 2009, I just casually started just tried it out again to see what was going on. And you know, the Raw SmackDown that in that summer was pretty good, and Raw was there was nothing about that summer that made me want to keep watching when the school year started again. When I actually had to choose between watching Raw and doing something else, you know, it wasn't going to last. But one thing that did stick from that brief period of watching WWE again in the summer of 2009 was the fact that I did discover these YouTube videos of people reviewing the shows, which I had never seen before. And I was interested by. You know, I think the first reviewer I saw was ROH Styles, and then from him, I found Truth Slayer and a bunch of other people. I was watching their WWE pay-per-view reviews, and even after I stopped watching late into 2009, I was still watching those YouTube videos, and then I started looking at those guys' other videos, and they were talking about all these other promotions that I had, either TNA, which I had heard of, but I had barely ever watched, and all these other independent promotions that I had never heard of. So I kept watching those, and eventually curiosity won me over, and I'm pretty sure it was October of 2009 that I ordered my first few Ring of Honor DVDs, and I liked those, and that was a lot of fun. So I just thought to myself, hey, you know, they're talking about these companies. I ordered a few of these DVDs, and they were right when they said that this stuff was good. So, you know, this is obviously a nice little community here. Why don't I just start making these videos myself? So that was what happened. I think the first video was on the last few days of 2009, and then it was from Ring of Honor. I started actually watching Chikara when you really started putting it over, and then it was summer of 2010 that I started watching the Japanese stuff, and I haven't looked back since. That is the stuff that has stuck the most. So that was it.
You said you stopped watching in '07, and you didn't really come back to '09. In this year and a half, 2 year period, were you at least did you read results, or did you just completely block yourself from pro wrestling?
I think the only thing I ever watched in that 2 year period was Ric Flair's retirement. I think that was the only thing. I really didn't. At that time, when I was into it, in 2006, I'd say I started. There was this. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of what are e-federations, where you pretty much have it's an online fantasy league for wrestling, where you pick a wrestler and you start, you know, writing these little stories, acting out their characters in these, you know, fantasy situations. And, you know, by the time I stopped watching, that website had pretty much turned into a creative writing website that was only very loosely connected to wrestling. So I kept doing that even after I stopped watching the wrestling, but there were still a lot of wrestling fans on that website. So I would hear about things that were happening through them. I would hear about, you know, Ric Flair's retirement. I would hear about, you know, Jeff Hardy winning the title. But there was never anything that, you know, so I guess you could say I was following the results, but it wasn't through an actual concentrated effort to follow it. I was just, you know, just hear about it in passing. So.
Okay. All right. Now let's delve a little more to those 2003 days. Obviously, you know, you were a big fan back then. You left the company in '07. Just briefly tell us that 4 year period. When was the peak? When was the fall? And when did it just crash?
I would pretty much say that I was your model WWE fan. You know, I cheered on the heels. I cheered on the faces. I'm sorry, and booed the heels. I would say the only two heels that stuck with me is always cheering. So I guess you could say that these are the two guys that I was the biggest fans of, were Jericho and Edge, and that's because of first impressions. You know, the first real WWE pay-per-view that I taped myself was Fully Loaded 2000, like I said, and you know, Jericho really won me over in that last man standing match. So from that point on, I was always going to support him, whether he was face or heel. And with Edge, you know, that was also around the time when the tables, ladders, and chairs matches were really starting to become big. And since Edge and Christian always won those matches, that kind of just made me, you know, believe in my head that they were the best tag team. So, and then of course the tag team broke up just a year later, and Edge was pushed as the babyface. So that was kind of what cemented me being a fan of Edge. That and the fact that I think that the babyface performances he had against Kurt Angle in 2002 were really good. So those are the two guys that stick with me as I was being big fans of. But other than that, I would say that no matter what the WWE did, I would just kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I would just, if they were trying to push something as important, I would believe that it was important. You know, that was how you behave when you're a child. So those are the two things that stick out to me. But otherwise, it was just, if they said it was important, I would believe them.
Another a common theme, not just from these interviews, but from people I've heard also on YouTube. A lot of them say that they really started to think negatively on the WWE when JBL won the world title. How did you react when he won that title?
I thought it was strange, but to be honest, I thought Eddie winning the title was strange as well. You know, I remember thinking to myself that he had no chance of beating Brock up until the very moment that he did it, because, you know, I don't honestly remember that he got any sort of build-up for that up until he won that Royal Rumble that they had on SmackDown. I don't think they did. So I thought that was strange to begin with. I just didn't buy into him beating Brock at all. I think the only time I really kind of liked the idea of Eddie as champion was at the end of WrestleMania 20, when, you know, he and Benoit had that emotional moment. So there was already in that year, there had been what I would call a strange champion just based on build-up. So when JBL did it, it was just another strange champion. But to be honest, I thought he did well enough on the mic to keep me interested. So it really wasn't JBL that turned me off. I mean, I guess you could say it was Cena because, like I said, when I started getting out of wrestling, it wasn't because I thought the product was bad, because all I had ever known was a good product. So I thought I was the one that was growing out of it. But I definitely was aware of the fact that I wasn't supporting Cena. I was definitely aware of the fact that I was really happy when Edge beat him. So I would say you could probably say it was more Cena than JBL. I thought JBL. I kind of just accepted JBL when it happened.
And before I move on, I will add that Eddie Guerrero is one of my top 3 favorite wrestlers of all time, big part of my childhood. But even I, going into that match with Brock, thought he had no chance. And people don't remember that before he won that SmackDown Royal Rumble, he had just beaten Chavo Guerrero in their feud. So it's not like he was heavily pushed at the time. So I will agree.
That was the last thing he did before getting pushed.
Yeah, he feuded with Chavo.
Yeah, because I did not believe he could beat Brock up until the exact moment that he did it. So. And I found the idea of him as champion very strange up until, I would say, that the closing moments of WrestleMania 20.
Now, and before we move on to Cena, because I really at the time I was just like a 9-10-year-old kid. I didn't really know anything about Triple H, about what the internet thought of him. But I still remember at the time really, really disliking him, his title reign. I was really upset every time. In all his defenses, I just really badly wanted him to lose. Not even so much that I wanted the other guy to win, just that I really wanted him to lose. How was your feelings toward him in that 02-03 period?
Like I said, they were pushing him as the guy to hate, so I pretty much jumped on the bandwagon with hating him. What can I say? I mean, late 2002, when they really they started forming Evolution, you know, that was all kind of a new idea to me for someone who, you know, didn't see the NWO first. You know, Evolution was the first big stable that I had become accustomed to, because, like I said, in from 2000 to 2002, I was only watching the pay-per-view, so the Alliance or the WWF team never really got the chance to resonate with me as strongly as Evolution did. So for a long while, it was just good heel heat, I would say. It wasn't anything like I was hating him because he was just so heavily featured. I just thought it was just he was just your natural heel that you were made to hate, and that was all there was to it. But the one thing I will say is that I remember so few big moments that took place in the whole Evolution versus Goldberg feud. I remember a lot about the Randy Orton McFoley feud, but I remember so little of my very few childhood memories of the Evolution Goldberg feud. So that to me is a signal that they really didn't do that well. That they really made Goldberg look weak against those guys. So that is one thing I would say, that one sign that he really was pushed too hard during that period.
Yeah, the thing about that thing is, for me, I remember when Goldberg, it was the Raw after WrestleMania 19. And Goldberg came out and speared The Rock. And I just thought, who is this man? Because I didn't even know who Goldberg was. And I thought to myself, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. What is this guy? What is he going to do? And then for a few weeks there, he really looked like a legit dominant guy. He was just killing guys. And then when Triple H beat him at SummerSlam in the Chamber, and granted, he did beat Triple H at Unforgiven and again at Survivor Series, but at Armageddon, I remember specifically when Kane gave Goldberg a chokeslam. A normal chokeslam that I've seen millions of people kick out of before. Kane gave him one chokeslam and Triple H just pulls Kane out of the ring and pins Goldberg. That to me was when the whole Goldberg aura kind of fell. So I do agree with you in that regard. Now let's get more...
While we've been talking...
What?
While we've been talking about that, I do remember one thing. I remember the whole thing they had where Triple H was offering a bounty on Goldberg's head. That was, but that was only 2 or 3 weeks worth of angle, and they feuded for 3 months.
4 months, I think.
In 2003.
Yeah. It was a...
Yeah, so it really did feel like an unmemorable feud.
And I do remember, I don't know how I remember this, but I do. I do remember that the match for SummerSlam was first announced as a singles match. Goldberg versus Triple H. And they built it like that for weeks. And then randomly, 2 weeks before the show, for whatever reason, they changed it to an Elimination Chamber match. And I just thought, well, that's underwhelming. I mean, to me, it took a lot of luster off the Triple H Goldberg feud, because it was just like, this was the big match. It was promoted like a big, big match. And now it's just, 6 guys get a title shot. Whatever. For now, so we've talked about Triple H, we talked about JBL. John Cena, you mentioned how Eddie and JBL both kind of had weak builds to the title. John Cena, I thought, actually had a very good build for the title. I thought they made him come off like a legit guy. When he won the title through 2007, what for you made you not like him?
Well, I agree with you there. I definitely think that Cena as champion felt like a very, very natural thing to me. So that I had no problem with that. I was still very much a fan in 2005. I did order that WrestleMania, and I was happy to see Cena win. What can I say? I guess, again, I can't pinpoint any really vivid memories of, what Cena did in late 2005 against Kurt Angle. I mean, that kind of felt like very forgettable, but I guess it was just kind of a dull formula. And I remember just being very aware of how happy I was when Edge beat Cena in early 2006 for the title. Part of me thought that I was just I had always been such an Edge fan that was why I was just happy. But again, I was happy as well because Cena had lost, and I just was very aware of that, and I was just, even though Edge lost just a few weeks later, I was still watching pretty much. I pretty much kept watching for the whole of 2006 just because Edge was consistently in the main event positions. Even though he was losing more times than he was winning, I was still watching just to show him some support. But then, even his act started to get dull, I'd say, because, I mean, I remember, I think it was a few weeks after he won he cashed in the money out the second time that it was when I just stopped watching entirely, because that felt like a duller moment than it was the first time. So I'm not sure if I can just pinpoint the whole thing on Cena, but he was definitely part of it, I'd say. Yeah.
Why didn't you want to order WrestleMania 2006?
2006. What did they have in 2006? I don't remember being interested in the Cena Triple H matches at all. I remember being somewhat intrigued by the HBK McMahon match, and honestly, off the top of my head, what else did they have on that card?
Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, Randy Orton.
I don't know. I mean, Mysterio won that at number 2, didn't he? The Royal Rumble.
Yeah, he did. I was at that Rumble.
Yeah, I mean, I was really invested in Benoit in 2004 when he came. They had built him up in that Rumble. In the lead up to that Rumble, they had put him against Heyman, the whole general manager, evil general manager thing. And I remember, I think I definitely said this before on camera. I'm really a fan of sympathetic faces, Mick Foley, and the way they pushed Benoit to the title in 2004. That's what I call classic WrestleMania builds. Mysterio, they seem to be trying to do the same thing or close enough, and I don't remember being into it as much. To me, I had already gone through the cycle of Benoit winning, and this just kind of seemed like didn't seem quite as exciting. Like, so I didn't order the WrestleMania 22, and I don't think it's a decision to regret either.
Fair enough. Were you at least, did you like in that match, Ray, Randy, Angle? I know you didn't buy into Ray as much, but did you at least want him to win?
Hard to say, I guess. I mean, I guess I was still trying to cling on to that whole thing of, cheering whatever face they were trying to push as important, and, likewise for booing the heels. But again, I mean, I would honestly say that the strongest thing that was keeping me watching in 2006 was the main event positions that Edge was in. That and the fact they were bringing back ECW, because I did really, really enjoy that first 2005 show. So when they were starting to feature it more and more, I thought we were going to get more stuff like that. But the fact that, for what they were trying to position it as something on the side, and for what that was, it was fine. But when they were starting to bring it back, they were pushing it as something important, and when they just started to relegate it, it just put a bad taste in my mouth. The fact that a few weeks after ECW came back, I just lost interest. That just was really something that I was really aware of, and really just didn't find. I just really was really distasteful to me.
Did you order December to Dismember?
Actually, that was at that point over here. There was very few pay-per-views that we were still getting for free, but December to Dismember was one of those. And I actually did watch it, but I got it for free, like I said. So, yeah, that I even then, when I was thinking that I was the one growing out of wrestling, I knew that pay-per-view wasn't good. That was one of those times when I just knew it to myself that I wasn't good. But I didn't have to pay for it, so I can't imagine what it was like for the people that actually gave their money for that.
Also, was WrestleMania 22 the first pay-per-view you missed, or were there others in between here and there that you just weren't interested in, and that's why you didn't watch it?
It's hard to say, because from 2002 to 2000 to now even, we started charging us for more and more pay-per-views, because before 2002 they didn't charge us for any of them. You just had to have the right TV package, and you could watch them for free. So it's just hard to remember which ones were free and which ones weren't. But yeah, WrestleMania 22 was probably the first big one that I definitely had to pay for, and I definitely didn't. So.
Okay. Now, you said that you lost interest in wrestling a few weeks after Edge cashed in Money Banks the second time. Well, that was kind of, one of the main points. You mentioned you were a big fan of Benoit. You know where I'm going. It's a very touchy subject, I understand, but how did you react to the whole Benoit situation, and did that contribute to your fall with the company?
Not to the fall with the company, but to give a bit of background, when Eddie died, I'm pretty sure that happened over the weekend, didn't it? And then the Raw tribute show soon after.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember that was at the time when I was just starting to get into these websites where these e-federations that I mentioned before. And the one that I was at that time, it wasn't the long-term one that I was on from 2006 to a long, long time. It was one before that. It was a smaller website that had just started to really fall victim to spam. The website was really starting to go downhill, and it was only going to be a few weeks until it was gone completely. But I remember one of the last times I was on there, I started seeing these messages that Eddie Guerrero had died, and I thought it was more spam. That's what I thought it was. I thought it was not true. I thought it was completely ridiculous, and that was basically what I was thinking that whole weekend when I kept seeing those messages over and over again. I was like, when are they ever going to stop with this? And then Raw came on that Monday, and they were saying Eddie had died, and I was absolutely stunned. I was like, oh my God, that was actually true, really? And that one really hit me hard because I thought it was a bunch of rubbish when I saw that on the internet. Because I only went on very, very few sites back then. This was one site that I kept going to, and I kept seeing that message, and I thought it was completely ridiculous. So I actually felt kind of guilty of myself because I had regarded that with such distaste that they were posting that message. So yeah, I mentioned that because it was Eddie's death that hit me harder than Benoit's. But when the Benoit thing happened, it just affected me like it would affect any other wrestling fan. I mean, I thought it was shocking. I thought I'm pretty sure I didn't see the Vengeance pay-per-view, so that happened the day before that. So I had pretty much no forewarning to seeing that message on the Raw screen that Benoit died. But like I said, by then I was just kind of slowly disconnecting myself with the overall company, so that one didn't hit me as hard as Eddie's, just on the basis that I wasn't as big into wrestling in general. But yeah, the fact that the circumstances in which he died definitely didn't help me and interest in wrestling. It did really hit hard.
I also, by the way, when Eddie died, I was heartbroken. When Benoit died, I mean, part of it is because I think I blocked some of it out, but I didn't react as strongly to it as I did when Eddie died. And I think part of that is interest as well. So now we're kind of getting into the fall. You got back in. I know you said that SmackDown was really good in that summer of 2009 and that nothing in the main event angles was great, but still intriguing enough, and you found us. But do you remember by any chance a match, a person, an angle that you saw that you were like, you know what, this is slightly better than what I remember from 07?
See, like I said, I didn't get back into it for that brief period for any particular thing that they were doing. I was just curious because it was something that I used to really like, and it had been a long time since I'd seen it. So I decided now that I had enough time over that summer to handily watch those shows. So I just started doing it. And like I said, when the time came that I didn't have as much time, it wasn't something that I wanted to spend time watching. But like I said, nothing they were doing at that time was so great that I was going to make a decision to put time into watching it. Like I said, SmackDown was really good during that time. They had the whole CM Punk Jeff Hardy thing going on. And one thing I might as well mention at this time, that summer of 09 was when I really started, paying attention to how the whole wrestling thing was structured, because even though I'd known, I found out at some point from, that 2002 to 2007 period that wrestling was scripted, I never really dwelled on that. I knew that, but I never really thought about, the mechanics of the whole thing. And, now I was, looking at this CM Punk heel turn and thinking to myself, okay, this is how they're going to do it. These are things that I remember them doing for heel turns back when I was a mark for the whole thing. So that was one thing that I was aware of as finding interesting during that brief period in 09. Watching the CM Punk heel turn play out and just being interested in seeing were they doing it? Were they doing it well? If I was a child, would I be interested in this? That kind of idea was going through my head during 2009.
What are your current thoughts of the WWE product?
Right now, this probably wouldn't surprise you, but right now I'm only watching WWE for the wrestling, and I'm having a fairly good time just doing that. I would say, I mean, when the CM Punk stuff last year first started, I was interested just like anybody else was, not because he was putting over Ring of Honor necessarily, but because he was. They were definitely putting a lot of investment in him, and it had resulted in a very, very good match at the Money in the Bank pay-per-view. So I was interested for a while, but then, it fizzled, and I just lost interest again. But it didn't really bother me because these days I'm only watching the WWE for the wrestling, and I think it's a quality wrestling product. So I can keep watching it for that, and it won't bother me at all.
Did you see the Daniel Bryan CM Punk match from Monday?
Yeah. Some people have been overrating it a little bit, but it definitely was good. In actual fact, there was a Randy Orton versus Wade Barrett match on last night's SmackDown that was better. So if you haven't seen it, watch that.
I'll watch that soon then.
Yeah.
All right, now let's get more. We've spoken a good amount on WWE. Actually, before we move on, have you ever been to a live pro wrestling show?
Other than the Pro Wrestling Noah shows, I went in the UK last May, just two WWE house shows. One in 2002 and one in 2005. The first one in 2002 was in Belfast, and the 2005 one was in Dublin. They were both SmackDown house shows. Now that I think of them, trying to remember anything notable about the shows. The main event of the 2002 show was Brock Lesnar versus Edge. And I cheered Edge on, like the fan of his that I was. So that was interesting. That actually, one other thing about that show, pretty sure Undertaker had just found out that his wife was pregnant around that time. So he was supposed to be on the show, but then he had to cancel. So they were telling us that Undertaker wasn't going to be there, and that was kind of disappointing. And the main event of the 2005 show was Undertaker versus Orlando Jordan, if I'm not mistaken. So that's as much as I can say. Both shows, I'm pretty sure I saw Eddie, and I remember that now that I'm saying to myself, I was lucky enough to see Eddie while I still could. I honestly couldn't tell you if Benoit was on either of those shows. It was about November 2002. Was he on SmackDown at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might have happened, but I honestly don't remember. Yeah, but those two house shows that I remember, those are the ones that I had gone to before. But other than that, was the Noah shows last year.
Okay. Now let's get into TNA. You said you kind of discovered the promotion. I mean, you'd heard of it, but you hadn't really seen a lot of it till 2009. What were your first impressions by it, and did you ever start to lose favor with the company?
You're really not going to get a detailed answer from me on this one because I never watched TNA on enough of a long-term basis to really, be interested or disappointed in anything the company was doing. I mean, the only TNA I had seen before 2009 was they were on this channel that on our TV package that they had it on at these really weird and unpredictable times. So if I really wanted to try and see it, it was going to be a hard thing to do anyway. But the one thing I do remember about pre-2009 TNA was one time I was watching it and it was a Slammiversary show. And I don't remember which one. It was the one where Raven won the title in the main event. I don't remember which one that was. I think it was 2005.
Yeah, 2005.
But yeah, I watched that because the King of the Mountain. Yeah. Well, I watched the King of the Mountain match, and that was kind of interesting because I had never seen anything like that before. So I had seen that. That was interesting, but there was nothing about it, about the company that was really going to really get me into an effort of trying to watch it on a regular basis. And then in 2009, when it became easier for me to try and find it other places, obviously late 2009, they did start to get interesting with the whole Kurt Angle, Desmond Wolfe stuff and AJ Styles as champion. So I watched it for a while, but I never really felt like I was truly so invested in the company that I was never watching it as more of, what can I say, an outsider. So I was never really disappointed whenever I just eventually lost interest and stopped watching. But it was never like, oh, I'm so mad at this company, I'm not watching anymore. I never got so interested, and when I just stopped watching, it was just a very uneventful decision, I would say.
Okay. So we'll move on from there then. You mentioned getting into Ring of Honor and Chikara briefly, and how we're seeing other indie promotions like at first, and how do you view them now?
Well, at the time, I had only ever thought about wrestling in terms of, cheering on the guys that I liked and cheering on the guys that, and, booing the guys that I didn't like. And now I was going to try and watch this stuff, a promotion I'd never heard of, a lot of guys that I'd never heard of before, and I was going to just see if I could enjoy wrestling as wrestling. And, at the time, I definitely enjoyed the stuff that they were doing. I thought it was fun. There were a few matches that really blew me away. And then I started getting the Jakara stuff because you were talking about it in a way that, reminded me of what I used to watch wrestling for. So I decided to start watching that. And they obviously had some things that definitely got me interested. But I'm not even sure what I can say at this point. What was the exact nature of your question?
When did you start to, because obviously I presume you're not as big on them now as you were when you first saw them. When did they was it when you started watching more and more Puro and you started viewing matches more harsh, you started watching matches more for match quality? Is that when you started kind of drifting away, not really liking them as much, or what?
It was never a case of me just finding problems with the wrestling I was watching within Ring of Honor and Chikara. It was just more of a case of I just watched the Japanese stuff because it was this whole world of wrestling that I had never seen before. So I just watched it out of curiosity, and then I just looked up what people were saying about that stuff, the Japanese stuff. I looked up for the Japanese fan. Message boards and that kind of stuff, and they were talking about the matches, and they were seeing all this stuff that I had about the matches that I had never heard anyone talk about before. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I kept the points in mind. I started keeping them in mind more and more, and it just eventually became a case of me. They were talking about the fundamentals of wrestling, and you start remembering what was it when you were a kid, Mark, for like stuff like WWE that really got you into a match. Do you remember those moments like, in a tag team match where both guys were down, they're both crawling over to get the hot tag? That was when you really started getting into a tag team match, for example. Or just knowing when a finisher was hit, you really thought that the match was going to end. You remember that kind of thing, that kind of match quality stuff that you even noticed when all you cared about was your guy winning. That's the stuff you noticed. So seeing those guys talk about wrestling that way kind of reminded me of that, and eventually just became a case of the fundamentals they're talking about looking better and better in a match, and the stuff that matches that didn't have that just didn't look as impressive anymore. So that's kind of what happened.
And so now that you watch, you've obviously gained more and more exposure to Japanese wrestling, and you've also mentioned that as you watch more older stuff, the new stuff kind of falters off. But because this was one of the questions that I'm kind of building into the interview, how so far in the limited amount we've had, how is Japanese wrestling now in 2012?
What can I say? I mean, Shiozaki just dropped the title to Morishima, and I can honestly say that the match was very unimpressive. That's one thing I can point out, and honestly, otherwise, I never did finish watching the Wrestle Kingdom 6 show. As hard as that may be to believe, I never finished watching that. But the reaction to that has been very negative, even amongst the Japanese fan circles and the Japanese wrestling fan circles. So I'm really not looking forward. I will watch the main matches from that show just to. Because it's an important show, but I can't pretend to be too excited about it. So, like you said, we haven't seen a whole lot right now, but it doesn't seem to be changing the tide anymore. I mean, Noah especially just really feels like a very dull and product that's really on the downswing. Like I said, in the last video I've actually done, every promotion seems to be stable, seems to be just going along nicely enough. They're not in any danger of going out of business. The only one that really seems to be in trouble is Noah. They're the ones that seem to be going downhill the longer it goes. So I can't say 2012 looks like it's going to be any kind of resurgence. But there'll always be. I would also say that there's not any chance of there being no matches that I like, and there being no chance that I'll be able to fill out a top 10 or a top 20 with matches that I like. So there will still be stuff that's worth watching, I'd say.
Okay. And now another part of the interview is you've developed a certain, what's the word, reputation, I would say, for how you now view pro wrestling matches. And what are your thoughts on your own reputation and how people view you in the positive manner?
It's kind of hard to say, I guess, because I've only ever got one video directed at me in a hateful fashion, and the reasoning was all just he was accusing me of overanalyzing everything to the point where it wasn't fun anymore, and basically the reasoning behind what he was saying was just was ridiculous enough for me not to take him seriously. That's really the point where it won't bother me, or I won't take any notice of it if the guy or whoever is accusing me of whatever isn't making any sense. At that point, I'll just either ignore it, not take any notice of it, or just point out how flawed the reasoning is. So if someone's going after me, if someone's attacking me and they're not making sense, then it really doesn't bother me, because at the end of the day it doesn't make sense. So but that's only one example. That's only one video. So can you honestly say that, have you been hearing any sort of negative reputation points about me from anybody? Because I'm only basing this off one video.
No, not really. I just think this isn't really you per se. This is kind of like you and Daniel and a few others. Some people, not me per se, but I do know some people who watch a pro wrestling match and on an indie show, and they think it's great, but they always make that same comment. Oh, I know these guys are gonna hate it. Like, how would you respond to that constant reference for? Because I see it a lot, that certain people aren't gonna like it because it has this and this and this. I mean, they recognize the problems that they think other people won't find it, but they still enjoy it themselves.
That's the thing that I've never really understood. Like, I didn't. When I was a fan of like Ring of Honor and stuff, I had nothing really to compare it to. That was the first time when I started watching Ring of Honor. That was the first time that I had ever watched wrestling for wrestling's sake. So I had nothing to compare it to. And for a long time, I'm guessing that the people who like Ring of Honor now wasn't comparing it to the Japanese stuff that I have talked up as being good. But when I was presented with the other stuff, I, compared the two and I decided which was better. And now it seems like more people on YouTube now are aware of this whole divide, and the fact that they can still stick to their guns and support, this indie style. I don't really understand it. I don't particularly, fair on them if they really truly do like it. I just really like to know what it is that is keeping them into these matches, because I think that when you stack the two, I guess you can say styles. I don't really like saying they're two different styles because I don't think that's true. But when you stack the two different types of wrestling together, and you can still say that Eddie Edwards versus Davey Richards is a 5-star match, I don't really understand it. I think it's strange, but fair enough if they can like it, I suppose.
Now also let me this is kind of. I mean, yes, I am the interviewer. I'm going to ask questions. But this was like if I were a fan sending in questions to ask you. My personal question is, I know you and Daniel, trust me, we've butted heads over this before, talking about aesthetically viewing pro wrestling in a certain way for the pro wrestling aspect, not only taking into account the storyline aspect of it. My question is, because a good example, I don't know if you've seen the match. You saw Finlay Sami Callihan, right?
Yeah.
Oh well, I saw on that same show. That match is awesome, and that match was the best match on that show. But from that same show, I also saw Johnny Gargano versus Chuck Taylor. I don't know if you saw it or not. And
No.
in that match, because I knew going into it that Johnny Gargano and Chuck Taylor are really great friends outside of the ring, and the storyline was based on how they were really good friends. And in that match, the way they kind of knew each other's offenses, the way they could perfectly counter their moves, and the way they can perfectly like use the other guys' finishers in the match. To me, it developed a compelling story, and I was really into the match, and I thought the match was great. I've seen no one give that match as much praise as I have. But where does it come for you guys where you draw the line for what you need to also take into account to view a match, or what doesn't matter?
If you can observe stuff that's happened in the storyline that's actually happening in the match, you can take that into account as much as you want, as far as I'm concerned. You know, the problem with people that were talking about Eddie Edwards and Davey Richards as if that match was 5 stars, based on the fact that they had built up Davey for the title, and now the fact that he had, you know, ascended in perfect storyline fashion, that the match was great. The problem with that was there was no moments in the match where, you know, maybe Day was in trouble and he needed to, you know, put in that extra bit of effort to get back in the fight, or any kind of moments in the match that played up the fact that they had built it up that way. It was just like the match, the way the match was laid out, it could have been a match that between any two people at all. There was nothing, especially for those two guys up until the last few minutes, where I will admit they did start implementing it and it was a good finish. But that's where most of us, I would say, would draw the line, I guess. You know, in Punk and Cena, for example, they very clearly implement stuff in the match that is specific to those two guys. You couldn't have that match layout with anybody else. That's where you have to, you know, keep it in mind. You have to, if you're going to appeal to the storyline that happened before the match as an explanation for a good thing that happened in the match, then, you know, make sure that the two things are actually related. You know, it's not just a good storyline and the match is almost a separate thing, you know?
Okay. Now, this was, we know how you all, we now know how you view pro wrestling in the modern sense. My question to you is, I don't know if you've rewatched the match. I'm just trying to go full circle with how this interview started. How do you now view, if you've rewatched it, that Taker HBK match from 1997, Bad Blood, that you saw on Coliseum home video that got you into wrestling?
Yeah, you know, I really should have rewatched this in advance of this in this interview, to be honest, but I honestly had not. I am curious, I will say, about that match, because I do know that it's so one-sided, and I do know that Taker pretty much dominates the whole way. So it'll be interesting to see how it holds up, you know, knowing that I'm not going to be won over by the fact that, you know, it's a big cage and they climb on top of it and all that kind of stuff. So it will be interesting, and especially considering that after all the offense that Taker, you know, dished out to Shawn Michaels, after all that, the whole match is basically that Kane comes out and, you know, tombstones Taker and then it's over. You know, I've seen people say that pretty much makes the match meaningless. So it will be interesting, and I really, now that you've asked that question, really wish that I had watched it before now, but sadly I haven't. I haven't watched it in a long while, so what can I say? I am interested, though.
All right, now we've put a great advertisement for a future video, so that's always good.
Yeah.
Now let's get into some of the questions, because we've gone a while, but it's been great stuff. So let's continue with some of these questions that we got. Is it hard to balance your college life with YouTube?
Honestly, it isn't, because I don't know whether you would characterize your YouTube use as, you know, a lot, but I honestly don't think I spend that much time on YouTube compared to the time I spend on forums, for example. And even then, you know, a lot of the time, YouTube activity is just simply a case of logging on and seeing if there's any new activity, as in any new videos, and videos you can watch while you do other things, and I'm sure that everyone does that. So honestly, I don't think it's a hard thing to balance YouTube and college life. I really don't. But I would probably say that other people spend more time on YouTube than I do. So.
All right. Best Japanese show from the 1990s.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. When you start watching the Japanese product, you'll notice that they don't put as much emphasis on the show. People have noticed that the openers are never any good, and they don't. It just seems like they don't put as much emphasis on the show. They build most of the shows around one or two big matches. It's not the entire spectacle of a show that is usually the drawing point. I mean, I guess. I really haven't seen that many shows as a whole from any time, even especially like regardless of whether it's the 90s or not. I mean, I'm guessing that at some point I will rewatch the two Dream Slam shows to see if they hold up. I'm pretty sure I've seen at least one of those before, and I thought it was hard going actually because there's just such a long show and a lot of the matches are pretty similar, to be honest. But that is definitely one thing you can point to, and the Super J Cup 1994 definitely has a few memorable matches on it as well. But again, I really wouldn't say that the Japanese wrestling product presents itself as presenting a great whole show. They give you a few key attractions, and then there can be a lot of filler. I mean, it's actually a challenge to think of a Japanese wrestling show with zero filler. So there you have that.
Have you ever made friends with one of your college professors?
No, I have not, and it sounds like a good idea. But I've been in college with me for like a year and a half, and it might sound like a lot of time, but it really doesn't feel like a lot of time. It really doesn't. And again, I don't know how the college system works in the US, but over here, it's pretty much for a year you have two semesters in 1 year, and for both semesters you'll have completely different modules, completely different subjects going on in any course. So you don't really have any one professor for a long amount of time. So to make friends with one of them, you'd have to really, get on with them and really agree with a lot of what they have to say and be interested to know more. And I haven't really met a professor that has captivated me that way.
Okay. Even though we've gone back and forth for a while on the subject, this is from Man on Fire 310. What are your current thoughts on Davey Richards?
I'm sorry that there's a bit of lag there. Can you say that again?
Oh, sorry. This is from Men on Fire 310. Even though we've gone back and forth for a while on the subject, what are your thoughts on Davey Richards?
Yeah. I probably should say this now. I don't think he's terrible. People probably have got this impression that I think he's terrible. He's really not. That's just being completely fair. And like I said in the Q&A video, when you can watch him in New Japan, and you can watch him in perfectly okay, mid-card matches, because he doesn't have time to do anything that might annoy you. But he's either going to be, that's just it. He's either going to be annoying or he's going to be okay. So that's the basic end here. The best match I've seen of him of recent times is the match he had against Zack Sabre Jr. in WXW, and I think Sabre was responsible for almost everything that was good in that match. So I don't really want to dwell on the subject, to be honest, because I think I did answer this question in the Q&A.
Yeah.
But that's how I would sum it up. He's either going to be okay or he's going to be annoying. So.
All right. Oh, and by the way, for those wondering, I just recently saw that Zack Sabre Jr. match, and I thought it was awesome. And I thought it was by far the best match in that whole tournament, like without question. So definitely check it out. All right.
And would you agree that Sabre did the most good in that match?
Yes, without question. If you were to replace Sabre with someone else, or someone he currently works with in Ring of Honor, the match wouldn't have stood out as much as it did. I definitely agree with you on that one. Big Van Walter, Sami Callihan. That was also that match was also great. Moving on. I've been on the forum website with all the Japanese wrestling talk and have said a few things and immediately become a mark or a dumb wrestling fan. So why are people who nearly exclude American Sorry, I need to say this one again. Why are people who nearly exclude American mainstream and even mostly indie wrestling and prefer Japanese wrestling such assholes? Not saying everyone is, but that's the impression I got. Wow.
It really depends on what posters you're going to read. I would say that ProRes.tv, the one that I'm on most frequently, I'd say that we would let anyone say whatever they want, and we would, we would speak our opinions, and we wouldn't be particularly, trying to accommodate everybody else and what we would say. I mean, we pretty much believe the idea that when you say something, it's definitely going to. When you say something about the quality of wrestling, it's going to be an opinion. So you don't need to soften your statement by saying, "In my opinion," or "This is how I feel." You just say what you say, and if people are saying, "Why are they treating their opinion as fact?" then they're missing the point, because it's impossible to present a quality point about wrestling as anything other than opinion. So there's no need to include those kind of statements. So that might rub people the wrong way, but if that is what's happening, then people it's just unnecessary to include things like, "In my opinion, I think this," just not necessary. So that's one thing, but that's what you'll see on ProRes.tv, on Death Valley Driver. I don't think you probably have never seen a website called Wrestling KO. And just before I go on, have you ever come across them?
I have not.
No. Well, they are what I'm pretty sure people would be talking about if they're talking about elitist Japanese wrestling fans. But the thing to point out is that I wouldn't even characterize Wrestling KO as a Japanese wrestling fan website. They pretty much talk about all wrestling, but they pretty much don't hold anything back when it comes to wrestlers and kinds of wrestling that they don't like. So if you were a fan of, say, Marufuji in 2010, you go to that website and you see them shitting all over him, it might make you feel a bit bad about yourself. So and they like to keep their little community within just people that they can understand where they're coming from. I wouldn't say that they only let people on that website that they agree with, because I don't think that's very fair to them. But if they think people are just spouting off these opinions without any kind of justification, they wouldn't really let you post there. So if you ever come across a website, that message board, you might see some posts that would kind of make you kind of piss you off a bit, but they're a pretty select group, I'd say. I mean, the Death Valley Driver is much bigger, and anyone can register there if they can actually manage to do it, because there's technical issues with registering there. But they will let anyone post there, no matter how outlandish their opinions are, and we're the same at ProRes.tv. So there are definitely there are elitist fans that watch a lot of Japanese wrestling, but there are elitist fans for everything, really. So I don't think it's really fair to isolate the elitist accusation like that.
Is wrestling bad nowadays, or is it just changed?
That's an interesting question, actually. Well, I would say that it's bad. Well, not bad, but very, 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 very average, and oftentimes just very unmemorable. But that's actually an interesting question to think about now. But I don't want to delay you for too long. So I'm sure that people who like the current indie style, the current junior style, would say that it's just changed from the way it used to be. But I'm really not sure what to say at this point. But I don't think that you've used the word purist, haven't you, to describe me and people who think like me. And we were actually talking about this on the forum a while ago. Purist means traditionalist, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and using the word to describe us kind of makes it carries a nuance that you're saying that we're out of touch with what wrestling is like right now, and I wouldn't really agree with that kind of meaning if that's what's intended, because I honestly think that stuff we talk about is the stuff that gets people into a match. Like I said before, when there's a hot tag coming, or when you think that a finisher won't lead to a 3 count, that's when the guys haven't been protecting their finishes. That stuff is fundamental to wrestling, no matter what kind of style you're working. I mean, I don't see any scenario where you can say that it's okay to abuse your finishers, or it doesn't matter to have a hot tag in a tag team match. So I don't think it's out of touch. I just think it's a respect for the basic fundamentals of a wrestling match. That's what I call it.
Okay. And I believe this is our last question. If you were to turn a modern pro wrestling fan into a Japanese wrestling fan, what matches and or angles would you show him, and how do you understand what's going on outside body language?
I'm thinking about the last part of that question. How do you understand what's going on outside body language?
Yeah.
I think what I'm going to focus on that because I'm trying to figure out what it means. I think what it means is, I think who asked this question just out of interest?
Man on Fire 310. Okay.
Right. I think what he's trying to, what he means by that, if I'm understanding the question right, is he's basically asking, is the things that we talk about actually happening, or are they just our interpretation of what's happening? And that actually is an interesting thing to think about, because we had this big discussion on the forum again over, the term storytelling doesn't work within what we talk about as wrestling, because it comes off as just the idea of what the motive, what is it? Just a bunch of ideas, and not actually talking about the things that happened in a match. But when you mention it in terms of, how the guys were selling, and, what the timing was like, and how intense the comebacks were, that's very clearly, observing what happened in the match, So that's why it's probably a better idea to talk about that stuff instead of saying, okay, it had a great story, because that actually in the end doesn't tell you a whole lot about what was in the match. So no, if he's trying to say that outside of body language there's very little in what we say that's concrete, I would honestly disagree with that. I think that it's very clearly observable what selling is, and whether it's done well or done not well. It's very clear, if a comeback is good, or if a comeback feels like it's just the product of no selling. So that part of the question, I don't agree with the nuance, if I'm getting the nuance of it correctly. What was the first part of the question?
What matches or angles would you show to someone to turn them into a Japanese wrestling fan?
Right. Well, the short answer to this is just I would reference the 5 match list that I'm, building on the forum again. But I guess to answer the question properly, I would have to, pinpoint a specific match. So I'm actually compelled to take a look at it right now as I'm talking. Let me just have a look, just so I can give a good answer to this. To turn someone into a Japanese wrestling fan, well, it really just depends. Like, I would actually ask them, what kind of style do they like right now? And, if the answer was Junior's style, then I would honestly tell them to go watch some good Michinoku Pro matches from the mid-90s. Those are spot fests. There's no question about it. They're spot fests, but they're paced well. They don't go on longer than they should, and they and have the spots that they have matches are still rather impressive today by today's standards, I would definitely say. So it would really depend on the style that they're looking for, and once they get used to seeing the whole visuals and the whole because even once they get used to the whole visuals of Japanese wrestling, because even, with a style like Michinoku Pro, there'll be, maybe there might be a bigger emphasis on, stiffness and strikes and the sort of thing that is inherent across all Japanese wrestling, because it does get presented as more of a combat sport. So from then, you might go to All Japan in the 90s, the classic matches from there, because, as well as, even though they're heavyweight matches, they do go for the big moves and the big spots. But while they also, get, okay, I'm going off on a tangent here, but the main point to make is, what style do they like? And, then you would introduced them to a representation of that style that took place in Japan. In my example, it was juniors wrestling, which one of the best eras for that was Michinoku Pro in like 1995, 1996. And from then, you would be more accustomed to the sights and sounds of Japanese wrestling, and you might want to watch, the heavyweight matches and maybe you want a more spotty style. So, All Japan was got a bit spotty as the decade of the 90s did progress, but they did structure the matches well. They had a very good standard of doing that. So the main point to take away from that is that you can tell me what style that you like, and I will recommend stuff that wouldn't be too far away from that.
And with that, I think we are done. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. We got a lot of good material in here, a lot of great, interesting stuff. And before you go, is there anything you want to plug?
I did all my plugging in the last video. If you were kind enough to put it all in there, in your own description box when this goes up, that'd be very nice. Now I'm going to have a look at, because I did plug a good bit of stuff in the last video, and I'm going to have a look at what it all was. It's probably just going to be a message board that I'm most frequently on, for people that are interested in what I say and what other people that think close enough to me are saying. And what else did I plug in that video? I'm having a look now. Yeah, just the websites that have ProRes results, because people sometimes ask me, how do you follow ProRes? And I can point to the results, the results websites, and the uploaders of the matches. Right now there is no, as far as I can tell, there is no regular uploader of ProRes shows on YouTube anymore. The last one was Senior ProRes, and he's actually now got a Dailymotion account that I should probably definitely plug to people, because he's still uploading stuff there. He's just not on YouTube anymore. So that's the kind of stuff that I'll ask you to plug if you're nice enough to do that.
Most definitely.
Oh, okay, that's great to hear. But other than that, thank you for having me on the show. I don't think I stuttered as much as I thought I might in unscripted conditions. I think this went pretty well, actually.
I agree 100%. And so again, I want to thank you very much. It was a great interview, a lot of great material, went really, really well, and also realized that a lot. Me and you in the early days we started watching pro wrestling, a lot of similarities I could tell by the way some of our stories related. And so I am Big Red 310, and let's say goodbye to my guests,
Amcn1.
And we want to thank you all for joining us. And with that, we are done. Thank you. Goodbye.